Shalom. What does it mean? I asked those same words to our Sinai Akiba Academy middle schoolers this week. I said shalom, and all together they said peace. And then I asked them, define shalom. What does peace mean? They told me three answers. One student said, peace, shalom, is the opposite of war. Another student told me, peace, shalom, it means to listen to somebody else that is not you. And the third, a student told me, shalom, peace, is when you can find something in common with a person that is not you. Those students in middle school that I asked that question to this week, they have grown up in a world filled with war. Their elementary experience has been Ukraine, then October 7th. And yet in that moment when I told them or asked them, what is shalom, what is peace, they were able to articulate a world in which they could wish to live in tomorrow. I wish that somebody would have asked me that same question 24 years ago this week, on September 11, 2001, when the Twin Towers fell and this world was fractured forever. That day, for many of us here, brings back painful and deep memories. And so I want to share with you a list of I will never forgets. I will never forget September 1st, 2011, the last time I saw those glistening silhouettes of those towers as I was heading to college for my sophomore year at Columbia University. I will never forget 10 days later, September 11th, 2001, instead of my alarm going off with the regularly scheduled music, it was an announcement there was an airplane accident above Lower Manhattan. I will never forget 10:28 a.m. when my biology professor dismissed us early because the North Tower had fallen. I will never forget that evening when I learned the name for the first time of Joshua Birnbaum. He was the best friend of my resident advisor. He just started working at Cantor Fitzgerald on the 102nd floor of One World Trade Center. He called his family to say goodbye before perishing. And for the last 24 years, I have invoked his name everywhere I have been. I will never forget Friday, September 14th, going back home to my family in Syracuse, New York for the High Holy Days, driving through the Lincoln Tunnel and looking back at a plume of smoke rising to the heavens. And I will never forget 2 weeks after that, on a flight back to New York City, looking out the plane window where those towers had stood and now looking at a cemetery at the depths of hell, reminding us of the evil that was brought to our country on that day, killing innocent people of all faiths, of all races. And I will never forget the division that followed between faiths on campuses, in neighborhoods, in cities, and ultimately in the world. A distrust that continued for decades, that put back the progress we were building towards a peaceful world. And then I think of those middle school students this week, none of who were alive on 9/11, but those words are a historical fact in a textbook, just like Pearl Harbor is for me. And yet 24 years later, I'm not willing for that moment to pass because we have a choice. We can and we will acknowledge pain and evil and injustice, but we also need to uplift reconciliation, partnership, and most importantly, relationship building. So that my children, so that your children, so that our grandchildren, when they stand here 24 years later, they will have a very different list of I will never forget than I listed for you today. This week when we commemorate 9/11, ironically or coincidentally or perhaps from divine providence, we learn about the laws of war in the Torah. The Torah tells us that when the troops go to war, in Hebrew it says, Nishmarta bechol davar ra, that you should guard yourself from anything that is bad. The commentaries come up with two main points of what it means, davar ra, to guard yourself from a bad thing. The first, they say, of course, is to guard yourself from the physical enemies that you will face during wartime. But they also tell us, guard yourself from spiritual harm so that you can still contain humanity in your own heart and soul. In other words, when war is brought upon us, we know that it brings out the worst in us, so how will we guard our own and others' humanity at the same time? The commentator Nachmanides adds one more interpretation, and he looks at the words davar ra, usually translated as a bad thing, but davar means word, a davar Torah that Celine gave us, a word of Torah. He says, guard yourself against bad words. Meaning, be careful how you speak about each other and to each other. Because Nachmanides says that if you speak bad with each other, it'll be even worse than what the plague of the enemy has already brought upon you. And so if someone would have told me 24 years later of September 11th that I would be standing in front of you, thousands of miles from New York where I was on that day, in one of the largest Jewish communities in the world, and I would bring to you Yosef Elazari, a Muslim from Morocco, and Sharaka, Muslims and Christians and Druze from countries such as Bahrain and Morocco and Egypt and Israel, I would have told you you were dreaming. And if someone would have told me that those young people from those countries, from the Abraham Accords countries, would have the courage to publicly use their voices for friendships with the Jewish people, with the people of Israel, that these young leaders would take Jews with them to Auschwitz for March of the Living on Yom HaShoah, on Holocaust Remembrance Day, I would say, you are dreaming. But guess what? On Friday nights, when we sing Shalom Aleichem, like the Neiman sisters just did for us, after our meal before Birkat HaMazon, we say Psalm 126, and we say, Hayinu kecholmim, that if we are going to return to Zion, then we must be like dreamers. For thousands of years, our tradition has commanded us to do exactly that, to dream. This past March, I had the opportunity to be in Israel and Haifa with an amazing group of 149 other people. They were all Jews, the next generation of Jewish leaders under President Herzog and the voice of the People's Council. Some of those people have visited here at Sinai Temple, and it was there that we were told, don't come up with a solution, but fall in love with our problems. One of my fellow council members was Noam Meirav. Noam is an IDF veteran, and when our group went to the Nova site that day, Noam stood up in front of the bus, and he began to tell us his story of saving lives that day, heading down south to the Gaza envelope. But then he told us what he does in his day job. He dedicates his future to saving the lives of tomorrow, to make sure that we can speak to each other. As the managing director of Sharaka, bringing moderate voices of the Muslim world, of the Gulf, to form a new Middle East that still today we dream of. For the last 24 years, through all of this heartbreak, we have continued to dream. But today and this week at Sinai, instead of asking our middle schoolers to dream about the word shalom of peace, we will be able to show them. This week they will meet Yusuf and his cohort from Sharaka. They will meet Noam, who is here with us from Israel. They will meet Sharaka, in Arabic meaning to participate. They will meet a new generation who are breaking barriers, who are investing in communal conversation, and ultimately who are guarding against hatred to create shalom. We heard Yusuf so poignantly. It is not easy. These conversations come with skepticism and doubt. But these conversations come with sharaka. They come with partnership. Because when Yusuf stood here today, we know that he risked his own relationships out of love, not out of hate. And he and I and all of us know that we share too much in common not to speak to each other, not to cooperate, and not to build a better world together. Yes, governments sign peace agreements, but sometimes they are simply pieces of paper. But human souls ensure that those pieces of paper are much more than that. It takes courage for people from Morocco and Egypt and Bahrain, Muslims, to stand on a bima, a kippah and a burqa, to say, I am with you. And it takes a lot of courage for us to give him a hug and say, I am with you too. It takes courage to take that step forward. Mark Gerson, in his new book, God Was Right, explains that when Jacob fought with the angel in the book of Genesis, he became a new person. He became Yisrael, which means to struggle with God. And the rest of his life, he limped. He had a physical scar. But we also know that with that scar, it did not define who he would be. 24 years ago, September 11, 2001, it left a dark scar on our souls forever. But it could not and will not define us. And so this year, I leave us and I pray with, we will never forget. We will never forget. But this year, our never forget will be different. Yes, we will never forget that tragedy and the thousands of people that perished. But we will never forget this moment today. This moment from tragedy to hope. We will never forget this moment of shalom, of peace. For as we sing together, Hinei matovu manayim, shevarachim gam yachad. How good it is to stand with Yosef, to stand with Sharaka, our brothers and sisters together, here at Sinai Temple, here in this country, and here in this world. And let us say, Amen. Shabbat Shalom.